Gas prices are down, but inflation is up. An Illinois candidate talks about the importance of the land of Lincoln, the federal government freezing funds for Los Angeles' homeless efforts, the Center Square investigation into a Washington hotline, and how states are reacting to possible changes to an international trade agreement. Welcome to The States, powered by the Center Square. It's Monday, June 15th, 2026, and I'm your host, Greg Bishop. Now, many of you may know me from hosting the Center Square Daily. Before that, Illinois in Focus, where we updated audiences on the happenings of Illinois state government. You may also be familiar with me asking tough questions of elected officials on the ground at the state capitol, or breaking down complex policy issues and the legislative process. Now, the team and I here at the Center Square, very excited to deliver that same work ethic to you daily with the states. We'll review what state houses across the country are doing and how you, the taxpayer, are being impacted. So be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to stay informed Monday through Friday here with the states, powered by the Center Square. Hope you all had a great weekend on your way to work today. Did you take note of the price at the pump? What about the prices at the grocery store? As we'll see here, you're paying less at the pump than last week, but your pocketbook is surely feeling the impact of increased prices across the board. Now, President Donald Trump, after a big night on the White House lawn with the UFC and their title card, he's now visiting European allies after he's criticized them time and again. And also, it's a day after the United States announced that there could be a deal with Iran and a peace deal coming together. Details on that could impact the Strait of Hormuz. Now, the president writing on social media recently that with the ongoing straits upon signing the deal on Friday for the purpose of oil will flow, and both ends are going to be seeing that region open back up. Now, specific details about this deal not yet released. And you've got the Prime Minister of Pakistan recognizing that a deal is expected to be signed in Switzerland Friday. Now, Pakistan has helped mediate peace talks between the United States and Iran. It's unclear whether an end to Iran's nuclear program, one of Trump's sticking points, will actually be part of the deal between the two nations. Now, on this note, oil prices did drop nearly 13% from the middle of last week after this announcement. Price of Brent crude went around $83 a barrel Monday and $80 per barrel for West Texas Intermediate, two standards for prices around the world. Now, during the conflict, oil prices shot up to as much as $126 per barrel. It could take several months for oil prices to return to expected levels. But where are we at right now? Well, if you look at the latest AAA regular gas price average across the country, you're sitting at about $4.06. Last month, it was $4.52. So we're about 50 cents less than it was last month. But look at that number from last year, $3.13 a gallon. So still a lot of movement that can be made to stop impacting your pocketbook at the pump. Now, economist Orphe Divounguy, he shared with the Center Square this week that economic data, it's telling a clear story. Americans are earning more dollars, but they're buying less. The economy looks fine on paper, he says, and doesn't feel fine on the kitchen table. Over the past year, the basket of goods got 4.2% more expensive. Looking at some of the other areas of the latest inflation report from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, that's the fastest pace in 3 years. And the pain lands exactly where families can't dodge it, Orphe says. Energy's up 23.5%. Gas up 40.5%. All of that driving higher costs for other goods. Groceries up 3.1%. And you have airfare up almost 27%. Now, some of the other areas, you're not seeing as much of an increase. Again, energy is going to drive a lot of those goods. Gas, 40%, airfare 27%, but used vehicles was actually down 2%, medical care down 1.8%. But are wages keeping up? Not really, according to Divounguy. Pay is up about 3.4% in dollar terms. It sounds good until you subtract that inflation level that we're seeing of over 4%. So once you do that, the average hourly wage actually fell 0.8% over the year. So more dollars you're getting, but you're not able to buy more stuff. Now, speaking of high prices and how affordability remains a top priority for voters, there is an election coming up in November. Surely there are going to be conversations about who controls Congress and what that looks like midterm for President Donald Trump's second non-consecutive term. But let's get a gauge of what the main issues are for voters in the land of Lincoln. Joining us to discuss that is Colin Corbett, an independent candidate for Illinois governor. Colin, thanks for taking time with us. I definitely want to talk about where you're finding yourself this week, but let's go ahead and jump first into those main issues that you're hearing from voters all across the state.
Yeah, you nailed it. It's affordability. Wages aren't going up at the same speed as inflation, as costs, and people feel it. You can throw around whatever stats you want about the economy and Wall Street, but on Main Street or kitchen tables, as you put it, people don't feel like life is more affordable. In fact, here in Illinois, we test it every 3 months. We ask voters, do you feel like it's affordable to live in this state or unaffordable? And a massive majority say it's unaffordable. Not just Republicans or independents, even Democrats, which usually you don't see people go against their own party in their own state. But even Democrats in Illinois say, yeah, it's unaffordable to live here. It's because those costs just keep going up and up. And in Illinois, we've been 43rd in GDP growth and 43rd in wage growth since J.B. Pritzker took office. So our wages just not only haven't been keeping up recently, they haven't been keeping up for 8 years.
Well, and we talked a lot about the price of energy and how that's hitting people when it comes to the price of goods with inflation. But Illinois kind of does stick out from other states, even in the region, for taxation, for business climate, for a whole host of other issues that taxpayers are being impacted by. How would you reverse those trends?
Yeah, I mean, it's about an actual agenda that helps working families. You mentioned energy costs. I did a video last week in front of an energy plant that used to be pumping out 1,350 megawatts of power for surrounding families. And because of our bad energy policies in Illinois, they put 6 of those gas turbines on a flatbed truck and sent them down to Texas, because Texas is open for business and Illinois isn't. That's 900 megawatts that's not being produced here in Illinois anymore. That's the equivalent of 600 to 900,000 homes that aren't being powered, or 2 million solar panels. It's just bad policy in Illinois, whether it's on energy policy, housing. You mentioned taxes. Property taxes are just out of control in this state. It's because we have too many politicians who are focused more on beating the other side or coming up with a good line that works in a TV ad, instead of actually doing the hard work to change our policy to actually fix things and make people's lives better.
Another example is the difference between Illinois and Indiana, and we could probably spend 30 minutes just talking about the Bears.
I'm competitive about Indiana.
Yeah, and we could spend a lot of time talking about whether the Chicago Bears are going to be from Chicago anymore. But I want you to talk to why Illinois is so important to those who don't live in Illinois, to those who may be in Indiana or Texas or Florida or Washington State or Pennsylvania. Why is what happens in Illinois important to them?
Yeah, Illinois is the economic driver of the whole Midwest, and I'd say, frankly, the country. We're the transportation hub of the country. Something like 2/3 to 3/4 of all trains go through Illinois. We've got multiple major rivers and Lake Michigan and airlines and roads. Everything goes through Illinois, and so how Illinois goes, so goes the Midwest, and so goes the country. There's a reason why when you see people move out of Illinois and go to Wisconsin or Indiana, they go right to the border because they still want to work in Illinois. They just don't want to live in Illinois and pay our taxes in Illinois and our costs in Illinois. This is an economic driver for the whole country. I always say that Illinois should be the capital of the Midwest. We don't act like it too often, but we absolutely should be. And so you don't have to be from Illinois to care about how Illinois goes, because if our economy were to get back to succeeding here in this state, that would help the entire region and the entire country. And that's what we all should want.
Finally, greatly appreciate you standing in a parking lot under the sun. Thankfully, it's not 90 plus degrees in central Illinois, but we see the Illinois State Board of Elections behind you. Colin, you are running as an independent candidate for governor. There's already a established party candidate for Republicans, an established party candidate for the incumbent Democrats, J.B. Pritzker. Talk about the process you're embroiled in this week. What does it look like? And will you actually be on the ballot in November?
Well, thank you and your producers for being patient with this hokey setup. Usually I'd be in studio and have a nice camera, so we appreciate your patience with all this. I'm standing outside the State Board of Elections because we've been objected to. The ballot access laws in Illinois are, it's just rigged. There's no other way I can put it. If you want to run as a Republican or a Democrat, you only need 5,000 signatures. You want to run as an independent or third-party candidate, you need 25,000. Plus there's extra rules put on who can circulate. If I didn't have 20 years of political experience and all the connections that I have, there's no way that I could have even gotten to this point. Everyday people just can't run for office in this state unless you decide to run under one of the two parties. And so the system is rigged against third-party candidates, independent candidates. When we beat this challenge, which we will, we're on a good pace, we're going to beat it. When we beat it, we're going to be only the third independent candidate for governor in 86 years in Illinois, and the first real, serious third-party or independent candidate since 1912. So the system is set up to keep this from happening. The two parties want to hold on to their control, but when you take on a broken system, you expect it's going to fight back. That's what they're doing right now, but we're going to beat it.
Colin Corbett, independent candidate for Illinois governor, greatly appreciate your time, and we'll definitely be checking in to see how that process goes and whether or not Colin is actually going to be certified for the November ballot to face Democrat Governor J.B. Pritzker and Republican gubernatorial candidate Darren Bailey. It's right here with The States, powered by the Center Square. We'll be right back. Federal agency suspending taxpayer funding to the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority last week, effective immediately. As you'll find at thecentersquare.com, California reporter Madeline Shannon reports a letter was sent to the city of Los Angeles Thursday by Andrew Hughes, the Deputy Secretary of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Now, Hughes accused the city of abusing hundreds of millions of your tax dollars on programs that failed to substantially reduce homelessness in that city. Now, the letter also alleged that the city's main agency to help the homeless, the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority, lacked basic safeguards and requirements to ensure that money was spent responsibly. He says that HUD has evidence that the LA Homeless Services Authority repeated false statements, that is, and is irresponsible with its actions and failures, including its lack of financial management, internal controls, and safeguards against conflicts of interest, and it poses a threat to HUD, the public, and those living in the streets of Los Angeles. Now, the federal agency said Los Angeles' failure to address the homelessness crisis is glaring. They lay out, while its funding has increased 178% since HUD first mandated the Housing First policy in 2023, they also note, following the outcome of a HUD OIG investigation, that permanent disbarment of the funds is on the table. Now, some of the information that they did share with Los Angeles and subsequently members of the media, they noted that homelessness in LA has increased 100%. They say free housing homeless for LA, it's increased 212%. And LAHSA receives the most federal taxpayer dollars in the country, and they receive more than $220 million in 2024. When you add in all the money they've gotten just since 2021, it's nearly $1 billion. Plus, HUD points out, this former CEO of this LA organization committed $2 million to her husband's employer. And again, permanent disbarment is on the table. Now, you've got more from the HUD secretary saying that HUD cannot ignore the Los Angeles Housing Services Authority's wanton mismanagement of public funds, HUD's mission to reduce the plague of homelessness in America, turning over billions of dollars from American taxpayers to an organization under investigation and suspected gross misuse of federal funding and obvious fraud, it says does nothing to reduce homelessness. Now, this issue clearly a hot issue, especially in the city of Los Angeles. It was a major concern for voters heading to the polls recently in a mayoral primary election. You got even members of the public going to address the city council, saying that those in charge of LA right now not really doing much to reverse trends. Mike Acevedo, a citizen of Los Angeles, speaking to the council on Friday.
Hi, I'm Mike Acevedo from Studio City. Los Angeles may be nonpartisan, but Democrats have controlled City Hall for 25 years. During that time, wealth inequality, housing costs, homelessness, police violence, and public distrust have all grown. I don't want to compare LA to New York City, but over the last year, New York City has shown where there's a will, there's a way. Does Los Angeles have the will to be a beacon of American progress? Only if you listen to the people here and adopt the following. First, for park's sake, fund rap. To create a more democratic and responsive city, we need crucial structural reforms. Los Angeles has the worst representation of any major city in America. Each council member has way too many residents, and the council has not been expanded in 100 years. Expanding the council will allow Angelenos to have better access to their representatives and allow more issues to be adequately addressed.
So among the many issues that resident raised was the fact that homelessness has not been thoroughly addressed. But again, a lot of money has gone to that. And part of the conversation also dealing with, as you heard, funding parks. In Los Angeles, Councilmember Katie Yaroslavsky, she laid out a proposal that could possibly make it onto the ballot for voters in November to reprioritize some dollars to focus on parks.
The department and its partners have done serious work to show the scale of the need, and I very much appreciate that work and agree with the goal of getting RAP the resources it needs to both maintain our parks and improve our facilities and provide programming that families, including mine, depend on. But as stewards of the city budget, we also have to look at the whole picture. This recommendation doesn't create new money. It sets aside existing money. Every dollar we lock into one purpose through charter is a dollar we don't have for something else, like broken sidewalks, failed streetlights, street repairs, homelessness services, public safety, and other basic city responsibilities.
Now, the Center Square previously reported that the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority was jointly funded by both the City of Los Angeles and Los Angeles County. In April 2025, the county suspended funding to the authority to fund its own homeless services agency after the authority failed 2 audits. That followed a federal court finding in March 2025 that the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority could not account for $2.3 billion. City officials, including Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass, didn't respond to the Center Square's request for an interview Thursday. However, Bass's office said in a press release sent on Thursday afternoon that she was also concerned about the misuse of taxpayer funds by the LAHSA. Here's the quotes from the mayor's office. Mayor Bass, too, has grave concerns about LAHSAs and zero tolerance for mismanagement and negligence, which is why she previously directed the city to evaluate how to move away from the agency. The office further said threatening federal funds does nothing to house people and jeopardizes the progress Mayor Bass has led to reduce homelessness for 2 years in a row after it only went up in Los Angeles for years. The office went on to say they urge HUD to work with the City of Los Angeles to provide the necessary funding to reduce homelessness. Now, officials from the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority also not responding to the Center Square Thursday. All of this comes after HUD earlier this month, Center Square reporting shifting $4 billion in taxpayer funding nationwide to move away from housing first initiatives to instead focusing on treatment initiatives. Now, HUD noted the taxpayer-subsidized beds also increased 151% from 2013 to 2025, and that the Trump administration is ready to move on from housing first and tie funding to a provider's results. HUD says the new notice funding opportunity, groups can apply for this funding, and it's intended to address the root causes of homelessness. And it ties that funding to performances to ensure that federal tax dollars spent on homelessness moves the needle rather than maintaining the status quo. We'll keep a close eye on the latest of how the HUD is impacting states across the country right here with the states, powered by the Center Square. We'll be right back. Records reveal some of the calls made to the Washington Attorney General's office's bias incident hate crimes hotline, all around alleged Somali daycare fraud. And the calls show both sides of the controversy. Joining us to discuss this further is the Center Square investigative reporter, TJ Martinell. TJ, thanks for taking time with us today. Fascinating to be able to get access to some of these particular hotline tips, I guess we can call them. But what were you finding when you were pouring through some of this information? And were you able to get the actual audio recordings?
No, I think a lot of these were not actual phone calls. I think what they were was there was like an online form that you could send out. I saw a lot of them that I couldn't print. They were not fit to print. A lot of people were angry with the way that this whole thing has been handled in our state. Starting out from, December when there was, reports of alleged daycare fraud, and the Attorney General's office put out a statement basically saying that people should not be going up to these homes, and that the people who run these daycares should be reporting these incidents to the hotline, but also to law enforcement. And it's important to note that this it's a bias incident and hate crime hotline. Hate crime is a legal status in Washington state. Bias incident is not. It's just somebody got offended or something like that. So this hotline is for people to report non-criminal activity. And I think that that's what is a bit unsettling for anybody who's, in favor of the First Amendment, which would be many forms of speech would count as a bias incident in that case. So you have people who are going up to these daycares. We've had our Center Square reporters have gone up to just make inquiries into whether or not they're an actual daycare. And there's been a lot of controversy from not just the Attorney General's office, but lawmakers who have, said they're in a position where they can't legally do anything about it, but they have raised protests and criticized that. And so I think what we're seeing in Washington state is this weird blurring of treating non-criminal activity as if it was criminal, but not actually implementing policies that you would if somebody actually committed a crime. And I think that confuses people, especially people who are not from this country, they're from another country where the First Amendment doesn't exist. So, but like I said, there was a lot of messages sent to the Attorney General's office that we just could not print. There was a lot of anger.
I imagine so. I mean, you've got to think, though, last year, a lot of the concerns about fraud seemed to boil over, not just in Washington state where, the Center Square reporters were looking into this themselves, but elsewhere throughout the country.
Right.
Stories about daycare saying, hey, we've got X number of kids, and then you go to that daycare and you find out, well, there's no kids there. What's happening? And when that's reported out, be it an independent YouTuber or a corporate, news organization, it's still, free speech and the right of the free press to report these things. Obviously, you had a reaction of people going out on the streets and doing their own reporting here.
Right.
So talk a bit about what we were finding in some of these transcripts, in some of these messages of people from daycares actually raising concern.
Yeah, they had people. I mean, I don't know if they didn't mention our names at all, any reporters from the Center Square, but they were reporting people showing up and asking questions and wanting to take photos or do, record videos and things like that. And so I think the issue is if they think that a crime's been committed, then they need to contact law enforcement. The Attorney General's office, it would seem like, is not the appropriate place to go with that kind of thing. And I get the Attorney General's office did say that, but that was in response to people going to alleged daycares and finding that there's no people there or no children there. And what's interesting is I wrote a separate story. I got an email that was sent by a former federal agency manager for a child care program in the federal government program. And he sent this email to someone at the Attorney General's office of our state saying that child care fraud is common. And I just thought that was so, and this was sent out during the whole controversy when it was erupting in December. So you have a former federal regional manager for a child care, program saying that fraud is common. And meanwhile, you have all these people coming out, and including the Attorney General's office, where instead of saying we're going to investigate, and I'm not sure if they have the authority to do so, there might be others, but at the very least, they could call on the appropriate authorities to look into this, but you really didn't hear that. And we've already, our reporters have interviewed our state auditor, who has no plans to investigate childcare fraud. There's the DSHS fraud division that could be investigating. We don't know. We do know that the state auditor released an audit saying that there was a lack of oversight over how these funds were being distributed, but that's not the same with fraud. And so, and I'm saying that they haven't found fraud. It's creating kind of a bit of chaos because there's a confusion over how people should be responding. And then you have people who have concerns about fraud as taxpayers. And I think what we saw in a lot of these messages to the Attorney General's office's hotline is they feel like these allegations are not being taken seriously. And there's a very strong opinion among many that fraud is going on. And the reason why it's not being uncovered is because the people who should be investigating it aren't doing what they should be doing.
TJ, one call that was from a suspected child care facility here has this to say: a masked individual with a camera and a microphone came to my child care facility demanding paperwork to enroll a child. I informed him we are at capacity and offered to place him on a wait list. He identified himself as a YouTuber attempting to record proof that his daycare was fraudulent. They denied entry with recording equipment due to minors being present and directed him to the website. That's just one side of this, right? And as you've kind of highlighted here, something else you found going through all of these different transcripts of messages to the Washington Attorney General's office were people saying, hey, there's fraud happening. Why aren't you looking into this? Why are you diverting away and instead seeming to villainize journalists? Here's one message that I'll read partially here, that they have to report Attorney General Nick Brown and the governor of Washington and Secretary of State for threats against journalists investigating Somali fraud and other fraud. I hope the Fed DOJ investigates and prosecutes you for civil rights violations. And it goes on to say you are a bunch of haters and even more colorful language there. But have we seen any indication that they are taking this seriously? I mean, you laid out, you've got an auditor saying we've looked at this and we're not going to investigate fraud. What about the feds? Are we seeing any indication that there's going to be some accountability to make sure, yes, these dollars that you're paying in taxes are going to a legitimate child care organization, or they're not going to a legitimate organization?
I mean, I think that that's going to be the big question. And the short answer is we don't know right now what actions are going to be taken. We do know that this involves federal tax dollars. And so that's what's going to create a very interesting situation if the federal government does decide to investigate and they discover that it's not just, a group of people committing fraud. They're being, again, this is just hypothetical, if they found that there were state officials that were actively aiding and abetting this fraud and then maybe pocketing some of the cash. Again, that's just hypothetical of what they would find, because now they're not just going to be prosecuting Somalian daycare fraud. They're going to be investigating and prosecuting people within the state government potentially. And so that's if they decide to investigate, and that's if they find actual proof of that. But it does create a problem for the state when they say they don't want to investigate something that involves potential fraud of federal tax dollars that they're overpaying.
Millions and millions and hundreds of millions of federal tax dollars,
right,
not just in Washington, but all across the country. TJ Martinell, investigative reporter for the Center Square. Greatly appreciate your time. You can read more about that and find out more here each and every weekday, only with the states. We'll be right back. trade official recently traveling to Mexico for talks expected to keep tariffs at the center of North American trade policy, even as American consumers face an average $700 increase in costs this year from U.S. tariffs. Now, that cost estimate comes from the Tax Foundation, which tracks the economic impact of U.S. tariff policy. And while President Donald Trump heralded the trade deal that he put together during his first term last week, he had a little bit of a different take on it when asked what's going to happen with the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement.
Mr. President, July 1st is coming fast. How confident are you that you'll be able to renew the USMCA, and what more do you expect from Canada at this point?
Well, I'm not looking to renew it. I don't, I made the deal, and the primary reason I made the deal is that NAFTA was the worst trade deal I've ever seen. Yeah. And I made it better, but I had the right to terminate. And, with NAFTA, we didn't have the right to terminate. I had to get these senators to approve that deal. That was a tough thing, Congressman, too. NAFTA had no termination. So, I've never said this before, but I'll tell you what my thinking was. NAFTA was a disaster for our country. The worst trade deal ever made, by far. They had typos in, okay? And they were supposed to correct them. And they never corrected them when they were signed. They knew there were typos. And there's a process for that. You state your claim and, you get a change. They had typos on percentages. Or maybe somebody wrote, and that was for years. They never ran, they had horrible, all against us. So it probably wasn't typos. NAFTA was the worst trade deal we ever had. USMCA did one thing that I loved. After 6 years, it comes up for renewal. I don't know that I'm going to renew it because, to be honest with you, the United States does much better. Hey, we don't need anything that Canada has. We don't need anything that Mexico has, but they need everything that we have. And they have to treat us better. With Mexico and Canada, we have trade deficits. We should have surpluses with them. We don't need their cars. We don't need their lumber. We don't need their energy. We don't need anything that they have. So the primary thing that I got, it was a much better deal than NAFTA. Much, much better. It was sort of a good deal. But it was a great deal for one reason. It gave the right to terminate.
Now, the president's first term, there was policy within the USMCA that united all kinds of people from across the political spectrum, including of Pennsylvania, where lawmakers on both sides of the aisle discussed the efforts to replace the North American Free Trade Agreement with USMCA. Although that agreement isn't set to expire until July of 36, regular review of the terms, and the countries continue negotiating every 6 years, as the first 6-year term ends at the beginning of July. Now, elected officials and analysts, they take a look at some of the possible impacts this agreement or the change, or could it be scrapped, could have. The Center Square contributor John Cole reports Pennsylvania Democratic U.S. Representative Brendan Boyle, who is a vocal critic of NAFTA, voted in favor of the USMCA. He said the USMCA improved many of the failures of NAFTA, but it did not do enough to address the myriad challenges faced by American workers. He went on to say now President Trump's chaotic trade policies are making things even worse. As a senior member of the Ways and Means Committee, I believe it is vital for Congress to use this opportunity to make improvements to the USMCA that benefit American workers, American consumers, and American manufacturers. Staying in Pennsylvania, Republican U.S. Representative Dan Mauser is a staunch ally of Trump and voted to pass the USMCA. In a statement to the Center Square, Mauser says the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement was negotiated during President Trump's first term to put Americans first and secured important protections for farmers and manufacturers. But as with many trade agreements, the U.S. representative said he has successfully negotiated. President Trump takes a thoughtful America First approach to free and fair trade policy. That means both America and our partners are treated fairly. Now, in Illinois, the Center Square reporter Sean Reed reporting in terms of energy, the USMCA provides that energy products like oil are not tariffed between the three countries, bolstering exports for the U.S. and providing reduced reliance on imports from other regions, according to documentation from the Office of the United States Trade Representative. Now, according to the Canadian government, Illinois, the fourth largest state for oil refining capacity, imports the vast majority of oil of its refineries from Canada, totaling $45 billion in crude oil imports per year. Patrick DeHaan, a fuel markets expert and analyst, told the Center Square that what potential impacts not renewing the agreement could mean for Illinois and the region. DeHaan saying that if the cost of Canadian crude goes up, or if there's a tariff on Canadian crude, that could eventually hit motorists simply because refineries in Illinois rely predominantly on Canada for oil. Now, DeHaan noted that the impact would more likely be felt down the road rather than immediately if Trump were to end the agreement and seek out tariffs on Canadian crude. We'll keep an eye on what happens again. USMCA set to be renewed next month with trade negotiations ongoing, and the president overseas in Europe as we continue to see the price of oil drop slightly after it's announced negotiations between Iran and the U.S. advancing. This is The States. I'm your host, Greg Bishop, and we'll be right back. Now it's time for America's Talking, with headlines from across the country that you can find in the description below or in your inbox with the Center Square newsletter, free at thecentersquare.com. Pastors in Texas say that state's new school choice program is bringing hope to children and parents. The Center Square contributor Bethany Blankley reports one pastor, Joel Engie, told a crowd at a Republican Party of Texas convention held in Houston that the new school choice program, quotes, has brought hope to our parents who felt so hopeless. Engie founded Kingdom Life Academy. It's a private Christian school in Northeast Texas. Now, Texas's new school choice program, the Texas Education Freedom Accounts, is rolling out in the 2026-2027 school year with more than 102,000 approved students. The Center Square reporting this past week, the latest batch of waitlisted students was more than 4,100, receiving notification of their TEFA acceptance. Now, at a prayer breakfast meeting hosted by Texans for Lawsuit Reform, San Antonio-based Cornerstone Church pastor John Hagee, he made similar comments. Meanwhile, in Georgia, officials with Atlanta's transit system promised safety for riders and penalties for those who vandalize the stations. The Center Square associate editor Kim Jarrett reports officers from Denver's transit agency are on hand to help Metro Atlanta Rapid Transit Authority Police Department with safety during the World Cup games in Atlanta. Now, MARTA is also hiring new officers and using off-duty police officers until permanent officers can be hired. The Federal Transit Agency recently opened an investigation into the transit service after the stabbing death of a 66-year-old woman on a MARTA train. MARTA, with an operating budget of $633 million and nearly $1 billion for capital programs, receives almost 15% of its funding from federal taxpayers, according to the agency's most recent budget. Now, the bulk of its funding, 62.6%, that comes from sales taxes collected by the counties that MARTA serves. Another element of the security apparatus, they're looking at drones as part of that safety discussion ahead of the World Cup games. According to the FBI, the agency seized 3 drones on Thursday. All the way over in Nevada, casinos throughout the state being hit by a big decline in income during the 2025 fiscal year. And that's according to the Nevada Gaming Control Board's new gaming abstract report. The Center Square contributor Liam Hibbert reports the board looked at 305 casinos that earned $1 million or more during the fiscal year, which ran from July 24 through June 25. Those casinos brought in a total income of $1.7 billion. That's a decrease of 34.8% from the 2024 fiscal year. Now, Nevada Gaming Control Board senior economist Shelley Newell telling the Center Square there's many things that can impact the number to our licensees. They further said, from tourism, which is if people aren't coming, that can have an impact, all the way to renovations being had, keeping some places closed. Now, Newell telling the Center Square that room and restaurant construction resulted in shorter income losses that showed up in the report for the 2025 fiscal year. Whether those continue on into the next year, not expected, as those renovations continue. Now, Clark County casinos, where most of the state's gambling occurs, they did see an income of $1.5 billion, but that was a 35% decrease from 2024. The county is home to Las Vegas. And about 90 miles south of Las Vegas, the Laughlin area, saw by far the state's greatest income decrease from 2024 to 2025. And get this, 758.6%. And a combined income loss of $54.8 million. Speaking of money, top prize of more than $6.5 million in one of the world's oldest and richest sports fishing tournament, and a big draw for the number 7 domestic tourism state in the nation, staying in North Carolina. Center Square managing editor Alan Wooten delivering this fish tale reports that Connors Daniels' catch of a record 919.9 pound blue marlin last week remained the heaviest throughout the close of the 68th annual Big Rock Blue Marlin Tournament on Saturday. Now, 47 winners across the tournament's many categories shared in the better than $9 million purse, 2/3 of which went to the 63-foot Jarrett Bay vessel out of Wilson County. Now, for context on this type of prize money, shared by Captain Cameron Guthrie and anglers Daniel Connor Daniels and Carly Guthrie, the PGA's tour, their champion gets $18 million for winning the FedEx Cup. But elsewhere, another big sporting event, the Big Rock is a beastly competitor. The U.S. Open, for instance, their tennis tournament pays about $5 million. So the Big Rock beating out that when it comes to the prize money. The Masters golf champion earns $4.5 million. And the Stanley Cup champions, 27-player roster, going to split $6.5 million. Now, sports and competition, it's big money, as you can see, and it also draws big crowds for local and state coffers. Now, the North Carolina Commerce Department says payroll directly tied to tourism brings in about $9.8 billion. And that's just some of what America is talking about. Be sure to get those headlines at thecentersquare.com. From my studios in Central Illinois, I'm Greg Bishop, and you can join us back here tomorrow for more stories impacting you, the taxpayer, from across the country, only with the states, powered by the Center Square.